Today matters, but not for the reason you may expect. This is not about punishment, loss, or something being taken from you if you look away. It is about timing intersecting with awareness. There are moments when attention itself becomes the doorway, when simply staying present alters the trajectory of what unfolds next. This is one of those moments. Urgency here is not driven by fear. Fear rushes, pressures, and overwhelms. This urgency is quieter. It does not shout, it nudges. It signals that something is available now that will not remain in the same form later, not because it disappears forever, but because it evolves. When awareness meets opportunity, movement becomes possible. When awareness is deferred, movement slows. You have experienced this before in other areas of life. A conversation you almost ignored that later proved important. An insight you brushed aside that returned months later with greater consequences. These moments are not dramatic in real time. They feel ordinary, even interruptible. And yet, in hindsight, they mark turning points. This message sits in that category. Skipping is not rebellion. It is not failure. It is simply disengagement. Disengagement does not anger the unseen realm. It delays resonance. Think of it like tuning an instrument. When you pause tuning, the music does not end, but harmony is postponed. That is what makes today distinct. The conditions for alignment are present now in a way they are not every day. You may feel resistance rise as you read this. A thought that says, "This sounds like pressure," or "I don't want to be manipulated." That instinct is understandable. Many messages misuse urgency to control behavior. This is not that. Nothing here is attempting to override your will. In fact, your will is central. Awareness without choice is meaningless. Choice without awareness is blind. The urgency of this moment exists because your internal state is unusually receptive right now. Layers have already been stripped away through previous phases. Stillness, clarity, boundary, peace. Those were not random. They prepared you to hear without distortion. If this message arrived earlier, it would have blended into noise. If it arrives much later, the clarity available now will have shifted. This is why timing matters. Not because something bad happens if you skip, but because something precise is possible if you stay. Precision requires presence. It cannot be rushed or recreated through force. It appears briefly when internal and external conditions align. You are not being tested. Tests imply pass or fail. This is an invitation. Invitations can be declined without penalty, but declining changes what happens next. The path does not vanish, it reroutes. Rerouting often means repetition, learning the same lesson in a different form at a different cost of time or energy. Notice how calm this moment feels compared to situations that truly demand urgency. That calm is intentional. It tells you this is not a threat-based call to action. It is an awareness-based one. No adrenaline, no countdown, just presence. Today is highlighted not because of external dates or cosmic deadlines, but because of your internal positioning. You are paying attention in a way you were not before. That attention is valuable. It creates leverage. When awareness is high, small adjustments create large shifts. You do not need to decide anything immediately. You do not need to act dramatically. Staying with the message is the action. Remaining present is the choice. From that choice, clarity will continue to unfold naturally, without coercion. This urgency is not about fear of missing out. It is about recognition of readiness. Something is available because you are ready to notice it. That readiness will return in other forms if you step away, but not in this exact configuration. So pause here, not to comply, not to obey, but to acknowledge that moments like this are rare precisely because they are quiet. And quiet moments are easy to overlook unless you are listening. This message reached you now because attention is not random. In a world saturated with noise, what you notice reveals more about your alignment than what you seek. You did not stumble into this moment by accident, nor were you pulled here by force. Something in you was already listening before you became aware of it. That listening is what made contact possible. Many signals pass by you every day without registering. Not because they lack meaning, but because your internal posture determines what can be received. When the mind is overloaded or the heart is guarded by fatigue, Even significant guidance feels distant or irrelevant. What is different now is not the message itself, but your capacity to hear it without distortion. You have recently moved through a narrowing process. Distractions lost their grip. Certain desires quieted. Old narratives weakened. This was not coincidence. It created a window, brief but precise, where awareness sharpened enough to recognize what usually blends into the background. This message arrived through that opening. It is important to understand that guidance does not chase, it responds. When attention becomes available, direction meets it. When attention is scattered, direction waits. This is not punishment or favoritism, it is efficiency. Energy moves where it can be received without being wasted. You may wonder why this moment feels personal, as if it is speaking directly to you rather than broadly. That is because alignment is always individual. Even when many hear similar words, what each person receives depends on where they are internally. The same message can be noise to one person and clarity to another. Reception defines meaning. This moment also arrived now because you are at a decision threshold, not necessarily a visible one, not a dramatic fork in the road, but an internal one, a point where your next choices will either deepen alignment or prolong cycles you are ready to outgrow. You do not need to label the decision yet. Awareness comes before naming. Timing matters here because awareness has momentum. When insight surfaces, it carries a charge. If that charge is engaged, it moves forward and builds coherence. If it is dismissed repeatedly, it dissipates, not permanently, but enough that clarity must be reassembled later. That rebuilding costs time and energy you no longer need to spend. This is why messages like this feel subtle rather than forceful. Force bypasses consent. Subtlety invites it. The unseen does not need to convince you. It needs you to be present enough to recognize resonance when it occurs. Resonance is quieter than persuasion, but far more reliable. You may notice that nothing in this moment demands belief. There is no instruction to accept blindly, no requirement to agree. The invitation is simply to remain aware. Awareness itself is the threshold. Once crossed, clarity continues without pressure. This message reached you now because you are no longer numbing what you sense. You are allowing yourself to notice discomfort without fleeing it, calm without suspicion, and insight without immediately questioning its legitimacy. That openness created contact. If you had encountered this message earlier, you might have skimmed it, analyzed it, or dismissed it as irrelevant. If you encounter it again much later, it may feel less precise, less resonant, because you will have already moved in some direction, aligned or not. Now the field is open. Nothing here is accidental, but nothing here is forced. That balance is intentional. It preserves your agency while honoring readiness. The message did not chase you. It met you where you already were. This is why it reached you now, not to demand something from you, but to reflect something already active within you. When awareness recognizes itself, momentum begins naturally. Skipping does not mean rejection, disbelief, or disobedience. It simply means disengagement from awareness in the moment it is available. That distinction matters. Too many messages use the word skip to imply loss, punishment, or threat. That is not what is being communicated here. Skipping is not a moral failure, it is a practical one. It delays alignment rather than destroying it. When you skip, nothing is taken from you. No protection is removed. No favor is revoked. What changes is momentum. Awareness creates motion. Disengagement creates pause. A pause is not inherently negative, but it does alter sequence. Some things can only unfold when attention is present. When attention turns away, those things wait. Think of it like hearing a piece of music begin. If you stay, the melody develops naturally. If you walk away, the song does not stop existing, but your experience of it does. You may hear it again later, but the timing, the context, and your internal state will be different. That difference matters more than most people realize. Skipping often happens unconsciously. You scroll past. You tell yourself you'll return later. You decide you're too tired, too busy, too skeptical, or too distracted. None of these reasons are condemned. They are understood. But they do have effect. They postpone resonance. And postponement has consequences, not dramatic ones, but cumulative ones. What skipping really does is preserve familiarity. It keeps you within known patterns. Awareness challenges patterns gently but persistently. When you disengage, the challenge dissolves and the pattern remains intact. This is why cycles repeat, not because people choose stagnation intentionally, but because awareness is repeatedly deferred. Skipping is often mistaken for neutrality. It is not neutral. It is a choice to remain with what is already established. Sometimes that is appropriate. Sometimes it is protective. But in moments like this, where alignment is available, skipping reinforces inertia. There is no accusation here, only clarity. Understanding what skipping means allows you to choose consciously rather than reflexively. You are not being told what to choose. You are being informed about what choice does. Many people skip not because they disagree, but because something inside them recognizes change approaching. Change, even positive change, threatens identity structures that have kept them stable. Skipping becomes a way to delay that disruption. Again, this is not wrong. It is human, but it explains why some moments feel charged while others do not. Skipping also affects perception. When awareness is delayed, clarity blurs. You begin to rely more on habit than insight. Decisions feel heavier. Options feel less distinct. This does not mean you are lost. It means you are navigating without the additional light that was briefly available. The unseen does not react emotionally to skipping. There is no offense taken. There is adjustment. Pathways reroute. Lessons reappear in different forms, often louder, often more inconvenient because subtlety was bypassed. This is not punishment. It is efficiency. If quiet signals are ignored, louder ones eventually follow. Understanding skipping removes fear from the equation. You are not being threatened with loss. You are being shown mechanics. Awareness accelerates. Disengagement stabilizes the current state. Both are choices. Both have outcomes. So when you hear if you skip, do not hear condemnation. Hear information. You are being told how momentum works. What you do with that information remains entirely yours. This is why this message does not demand your attention. It invites it, because only chosen awareness has power. Nothing will be taken from you if you choose to look away. That needs to be stated clearly, because fear-based messages have trained people to expect loss as a consequence of disengagement. That is not how alignment works. What is meant for you is not fragile, and it is not dependent on constant vigilance to remain intact. No unseen hand is waiting to remove protection, opportunity, or favor because you paused or hesitated. Your life is not governed by scarcity at that level. What has been established for you does not disappear because of one moment of inattention. You are not operating under a system where blessings are revoked or safety is withdrawn as punishment. That framework belongs to manipulation, not guidance. True authority does not need to threaten in order to be respected. It is important to understand this, because misunderstanding creates anxiety, and anxiety distorts perception. When people believe something will be taken from them, they act from fear rather than clarity. Fear-driven action may create movement, but it does not create alignment. It creates survival behavior. This message does not operate from that space. What will not be taken from you includes your worth, your direction, your capacity to realign later, and your ability to receive insight in the future. None of those are at risk. You do not lose access to wisdom because you were tired. You do not lose protection because you needed distance. You do not lose purpose because you needed time. Even momentum itself is not stolen. It is paused, not confiscated, and a pause is reversible. Momentum resumes when awareness resumes. There is no permanent penalty attached to stepping back. There is only sequence. You may have internalized the idea that missing one moment means missing everything. That belief creates unnecessary pressure and erodes trust. Alignment is resilient. It adapts. It meets you again and again, often in new forms, because growth is not linear and learning is rarely completed in one encounter. Nothing here is transactional. You are not earning safety by paying attention. You are not maintaining favor by complying. This is not an exchange. It is an invitation into clarity. Invitations do not expire out of spite. They expire because timing changes, not because access is revoked. Understanding what will not be taken allows you to relax your defenses. When defenses relax, perception sharpens. You can engage or disengage without panic. That freedom is intentional. Only choices made freely have real effect. If you decide to step away, the unseen does not pursue you with urgency or accusation. It simply adjusts. Paths reroute. Lessons return later, often wrapped in different circumstances. You are not abandoned in that process. You are simply moving at a different pace. This is why it matters to remove fear from the equation. Fear clouds judgment. Fear creates false urgency. Fear mistakes guidance for threat. Once fear is removed, you can see the moment for what it is, an opportunity, not an ultimatum. So hear this clearly and without distortion. Nothing essential will be taken from you if you skip. No punishment follows. No loss is enforced. What changes is not your standing, but your timing. And timing, unlike worth, is fluid. Knowing this gives you power rather than pressure. It allows you to choose presence because it resonates, not because you are afraid of consequence. And that kind of choice is the only kind that produces genuine alignment. What will be paused instead is not your life, your protection, or your future. It is momentum that depends on awareness. Momentum does not exist independently. It forms when attention and opportunity meet. When awareness withdraws, movement does not collapse, but it slows into holding. Holding is not loss. It is suspension. This pause is subtle. You may not notice it immediately. Life will continue. Responsibilities will remain. Days will pass. But internally, things feel less fluid. Decisions take longer. Clarity feels slightly out of reach. You revisit the same thoughts without new insight. This is not punishment. It is simply the absence of activation. Momentum requires participation. When you stay present, alignment advances naturally. When you disengage, alignment waits. It does not push, pull, or pressure. It respects autonomy. The pause exists because forcing movement without awareness would create distortion rather than progress. Think of momentum like a current rather than a command. When you step into it, movement carries you forward with less resistance. When you step out, the current continues, but you are no longer moving with it. Re-entry is always possible, but the position where you re-enter may differ from where you stepped out. That difference is timing. What pauses is the ease with which things connect. Conversations that might have unfolded naturally now require effort. Opportunities that might have aligned quietly now feel delayed or unclear. Not because they are gone, but because the internal readiness to recognize and receive them has shifted. This pause often feels like repetition. You encounter similar situations, similar lessons, similar emotional responses. This repetition is not stagnation, it is reinforcement. Alignment does not advance until awareness returns. So life offers familiar terrain until perception changes. It is important to understand that this pause is protective. Moving forward without clarity would cost you more than waiting. Momentum without awareness creates momentum in the wrong direction. The pause ensures that movement, when it resumes, does so with precision rather than speed. You may interpret the pause as resistance or blockage. It is neither. It is responsiveness. Alignment does not move ahead of you. It moves with you. When you are present, it flows. When you are not, it holds. This is why some people feel stuck, not because nothing is happening, but because awareness has been deferred repeatedly. Each deferment compounds the pause slightly. Over time, the absence of momentum feels heavier than the original invitation ever did. But the pause is not permanent. It has no emotional charge attached to it. It is not judgment. It is simply waiting. The moment awareness returns, momentum responds, often quickly, often quietly, without drama. Understanding this removes anxiety. You are not racing against loss. You are choosing between flow and holding. Both are valid. One moves, one preserves, neither condemns. This is what will be paused, not opportunity itself, but the ease of engagement with it. Not direction, but acceleration. Not clarity forever, but clarity now. And knowing that allows you to decide without fear, without pressure, and without misunderstanding what is actually at stake. The cost of delay is not dramatic, but it is cumulative. Delay does not punish you, it compounds familiarity. When awareness is postponed, patterns remain unchallenged, and what remains unchanged quietly gains strength. This is how cycles persist, not because they are powerful, but because they are uninterrupted. Delay often feels harmless because nothing visibly breaks. Life continues to function. You adapt, you manage. But beneath that surface stability, repetition settles in. The same conversations resurface. The same emotional responses activate. The same decisions present themselves with slightly different details. Over time, this repetition creates fatigue, not because it is intense, but because it is unchanging. The cost, then, is time spent rehearsing what you are ready to move beyond. Time is not wasted in a moral sense, but it is spent maintaining equilibrium instead of advancing alignment. You remain capable but underutilized, present but not fully engaged. This state can feel deceptively comfortable because it avoids disruption, but comfort is not the same as fulfillment. Delay also blunts sensitivity. When awareness surfaces repeatedly and is consistently deferred, perception dulls. You begin to rely more on habit than insight. Decisions feel heavier. Intuition feels quieter, not absent, just less distinct. This is not loss of guidance. It is reduced signal strength caused by repeated disengagement. Another cost of delay is increased complexity. What could have been addressed simply begins to require more explanation, more effort, more emotional labor. Early awareness offers clean adjustment. Late awareness requires repair. Neither is impossible, but one is far less demanding. You may notice that when you delay, external circumstances seem to demand more of you. Obligations increase. Distractions multiply. This is not coincidence. When alignment pauses, energy disperses. Without a clear internal direction, attention is pulled outward to whatever is loudest or most urgent. Delay also affects confidence, not because you become incapable, but because momentum reinforces trust. When you move in alignment, confidence builds naturally. When movement stalls, doubt fills the vacuum. You begin to question decisions you once felt clear about, not because they were wrong, but because the reinforcing motion paused. It is important to understand that delay does not erase opportunity. It reframes it. Opportunities return with added layers, more context, more responsibility, more resistance. This is not a penalty. It is the natural result of time passing without integration. What could have been entered lightly now requires negotiation. The cost of delay is not that something bad happens. It is that something ready waits longer than necessary. Waiting itself is not harmful, but prolonged waiting without awareness creates stagnation rather than rest. This is why delay often feels heavier than action. Action, even imperfect, engages energy. Delay disperses it. Over time, dispersion feels like exhaustion without movement. Yet even this cost is not meant to pressure you. It is meant to inform you. Understanding what delay does allows you to choose intentionally rather than reflexively. You are not being warned, you are being educated. When awareness returns, momentum responds. When momentum returns, clarity strengthens. The cost of delay ends the moment engagement resumes. So know this. Delay does not condemn you, but it does extend what no longer needs to be extended. And awareness of that fact restores your ability to choose differently, without fear, without urgency, and without misunderstanding what is actually at stake. Fear is not the engine behind this message, and it never was. Fear demands reaction. Fear shortens vision. Fear overwhelms discernment so that compliance feels like relief. None of that produces alignment. Authority that relies on fear produces obedience at the cost of clarity, and clarity is the very thing being protected here. True guidance does not threaten consequence to secure attention. It presents reality and allows you to choose. Fear says, act now or lose everything. Guidance says, notice what is available and decide how you want to engage. One compresses your will, the other respects it. If fear were the motivator, this message would feel frantic, loud, and absolute. Instead, it feels steady, explanatory, and spacious. That difference matters. You may have been conditioned to associate spiritual authority with urgency, warning, or consequence. Many voices use fear because it is effective in the short term. It creates movement quickly, but it also creates dependency, confusion, and exhaustion. That is not the outcome being sought here. This message is not trying to move you faster. It is trying to help you move accurately. Fear also distorts timing. It makes every moment feel like the last chance. Guidance understands timing as fluid. There are moments of availability, moments of pause, moments of recalibration. None of them are emergencies. Even when timing matters, it is communicated without panic. Panic belongs to insecurity, not authority. If fear were the motivator, you would feel pressured to prove something, your belief, your worth, your obedience. You would feel compelled to act immediately just to escape discomfort. Instead, what is being offered here is understanding. Understanding creates agency. Agency creates alignment. Notice how the message repeatedly removes threat rather than amplifies it. Nothing is being taken. Nothing is being revoked. Nothing is being imposed. That alone tells you fear is not the driver. Fear needs leverage. This message removes leverage and still invites attention. That is confidence, not manipulation. It is also important to understand that fear-based motivation cannot sustain growth. Even when it produces change, that change collapses once fear subsides. Alignment built on fear eventually requires more fear to maintain it. Alignment built on awareness sustains itself. That is why this message emphasizes understanding consequences rather than threatening them. You are not being warned of danger. You are being informed of mechanics. Fear obscures mechanics. It replaces understanding with urgency. Here, urgency has been deliberately stripped of fear so that you can see clearly what is actually happening, how awareness, timing, and momentum interact. If at any point you feel anxious reading this, pause and notice where that anxiety originates. It does not come from the message itself. It comes from past experiences where urgency was paired with threat. That association is being dismantled here. You are being shown that urgency can exist without fear, and guidance can exist without coercion. This distinction matters because it teaches you how to recognize true guidance going forward. When something demands your attention through intimidation, scarcity, or shame, it is not aligned authority. When something invites your attention through clarity, calm, and respect for choice, it is. The absence of fear is not a lack of seriousness. It is a sign of stability. Stable authority does not need to escalate. It does not need to shock. It does not need to frighten. It communicates once clearly and allows space for response. This message stands in that space. It does not chase you. It does not corner you. It does not punish hesitation. It simply states what is available, how it functions, and what changes depending on your engagement. That is why fear is not the motivator here. Awareness is. And awareness only works when you are free to accept it or decline it without consequence hanging over your head. Freedom is not a threat to alignment. It is the condition that makes alignment real. When attention is given, when you stay present rather than skimming past, something subtle but decisive activates. Not externally at first, but internally. Your perception sharpens. Thoughts slow just enough for discernment to surface. You begin to notice distinctions you would have otherwise missed. This is not dramatic insight. It is usable clarity. Presence does not demand effort. It creates efficiency. When you are attentive, energy stops scattering across unnecessary concerns. You feel less pulled in multiple directions. Even if circumstances remain unchanged, your relationship to them shifts. You are no longer reacting from habit. You are responding from awareness. That alone alters outcomes. When attention is given, the body responds before the mind fully understands. Breathing steadies. Tension releases slightly. The nervous system recognizes safety, not because everything is resolved, but because coherence has returned. From this state, decisions become cleaner. You are less likely to overcorrect, over-explain, or overcommit. Attention also activates discernment. Discernment is not judgment. It is recognition. You see what aligns without having to argue with yourself. You sense when something is off without needing proof. This sensitivity is not mystical, it is practical. It saves time, energy, and regret. When you remain present, momentum resumes naturally, not as pressure to act, but as a sense of readiness. Ideas connect. Timing feels clearer. Opportunities reveal themselves not as demands, but as options you can assess calmly. Attention does not force movement, it prepares it. You may notice that when you give attention, distractions lose their pull. Things that once felt urgent now feel optional. This is not loss of interest, it is prioritization becoming intuitive. Attention reorganizes importance without conscious effort. There is also an emotional effect. When attention is sustained, anxiety decreases, not because threats vanish, but because your system is no longer bracing for unknowns. Awareness replaces anticipation. You stop projecting outcomes and start engaging reality as it is. That grounding is stabilizing. Attention, given consistently, creates continuity. Instead of fragmented moments of insight followed by long stretches of confusion, you experience a through line. One realization builds on the last. Growth becomes cumulative rather than episodic. This continuity is what allows alignment to deepen instead of resetting repeatedly. You may feel a quiet confidence emerge, not the kind that declares itself, but the kind that does not need to defend its position. This confidence comes from coherence. When your internal signals align, you trust yourself more. That trust changes how you move through situations that once felt intimidating. Attention also refines timing. You sense when to wait and when to act without forcing either. This sensitivity cannot be rushed. It develops only when attention is given long enough for patterns to reveal themselves. Skimming misses patterns. Presence recognizes them. Nothing extraordinary is required to activate this. You do not need belief, affirmation, or certainty. You need willingness to stay with what is unfolding instead of escaping into distraction or dismissal. That willingness is enough. This is what happens when attention is given. Clarity strengthens, momentum resumes, and your internal environment stabilizes. Not because something external intervenes, but because you are finally meeting the moment as it is, fully, quietly, and without resistance. From this place, whatever comes next will meet you prepared. Responsibility enters the picture the moment awareness is sustained. Not responsibility in the sense of blame or burden, but in the sense of authorship. When you are aware, you are no longer operating on autopilot. You begin to recognize where your choices originate and where they lead. That recognition quietly returns agency to you. Many people avoid awareness not because they fear truth, but because awareness removes plausible deniability. When you are unaware, patterns feel external. When you are aware, patterns become participatory. You begin to see how small decisions compound, how reactions reinforce loops, how silence and action both carry weight. This is not meant to induce guilt. It is meant to restore authorship. Responsibility here does not mean you control everything. It means you influence more than you thought. You cannot dictate outcomes, but you can choose posture. You cannot force alignment, but you can cooperate with it. Cooperation is the responsibility being referenced, not control, not perfection. As awareness deepens, you may feel an initial heaviness. That heaviness comes from realizing how often you deferred choice in the past. Do not linger there. That recognition is not an indictment, it is evidence of growth. You can only see what you are now capable of carrying. Responsibility also means you stop waiting to be moved by pressure. You move because something resonates. You pause because something feels misaligned. This shift changes how you relate to authority, external and internal. You become less reactive to demands and more responsive to insight. This responsibility is subtle. It does not announce itself as a new rule set. It shows up as questions you now ask naturally. Why am I choosing this? What am I avoiding? What am I actually responding to? These questions were always available, but now they matter. You may notice that responsibility increases discernment around excuses. Not harshly, but clearly. You can tell the difference between rest and avoidance, between boundaries and withdrawal, between patience and procrastination. This clarity does not force action, but it removes confusion about what is happening internally. With responsibility comes restraint. You act less impulsively, not because you are suppressing yourself, but because you understand consequence more clearly. This restraint feels like maturity, not limitation. It gives your actions weight. Responsibility also reframes blame. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "How am I engaging with what is happening?" That shift alone opens options that were previously invisible. Victimhood narrows choice. Authorship expands it. It is important to note that responsibility does not mean you must act immediately. Sometimes responsibility means waiting intentionally rather than drifting. Waiting with awareness is different from delay through disengagement. One preserves alignment, the other extends inertia. As this responsibility integrates, you may feel less interested in drama, urgency, or external validation. Those things rely on reactivity. Responsibility thrives in steadiness. You become more selective about where you invest energy because you understand its impact more clearly. This is not a demand placed upon you. It is a role you naturally step into as awareness stabilizes. No one assigns it. You claim it. And once claimed, it changes how you experience everything else. Responsibility is not weight added to your life. It is weight redistributed, taken off reaction, and placed into intention. From that place, movement becomes cleaner and alignment becomes sustainable. This is what awareness matures into. Not pressure, not obligation, but authorship. Distraction rarely announces itself as avoidance. More often, it presents as harmless activity, necessary business, or justified delay. It feels productive enough to excuse disengagement, but subtle enough to erode alignment without triggering alarm. This is how distraction weakens alignment, not through collapse, but through diffusion. Alignment requires continuity, not intensity, not perfection, but sustained attention over time. Distraction interrupts that continuity in small increments. One moment of disengagement becomes a habit. A habit becomes a default. Over time, clarity that once felt accessible begins to feel distant, not because it left, but because the signal is being overridden by constant input. When distraction dominates, your attention becomes reactive. Instead of choosing what to engage, you respond to whatever demands it most loudly. Urgency replaces importance. Noise replaces nuance. In that state, even meaningful opportunities feel overwhelming because discernment has been dulled by overstimulation. Distraction also fragments intention. You may start many things without completing them. You may revisit decisions repeatedly without resolution. This is not a lack of discipline, it is a lack of coherence. Alignment gives direction to effort. Distraction scatters it. You may notice that when distraction increases, your internal dialogue becomes louder and less precise. Thoughts overlap. Emotions blur. Insight feels fleeting. This is not because you lost clarity, but because clarity requires space to register. Distraction fills that space before clarity can settle. It is important to recognize that not all distraction is external. Mental distraction, rumination, projection, constant evaluation can be just as disruptive as digital noise. When the mind is perpetually occupied with past or future scenarios, it cannot engage the present moment where alignment operates. Distraction weakens alignment by delaying feedback. When you are attentive, feedback is immediate. You sense when something aligns and when it does not. When distracted, that feedback arrives late or not at all. You continue in directions that feel slightly off because the signal was missed when it first appeared. Over time, this creates misalignment that feels confusing rather than obvious. You may sense dissatisfaction without knowing why. You may feel restless without clear cause. This is alignment signaling through discomfort because earlier, quieter signals were drowned out. Distraction also creates dependency on stimulation. Stillness begins to feel uncomfortable. Silence feels empty rather than grounding. This discomfort drives further distraction, creating a loop that distances you from internal reference points. Alignment cannot compete with constant stimulation. It waits for space. This is why distraction is addressed here without judgment. It is not a moral failing. It is a structural issue. When attention is fragmented, alignment cannot consolidate. Addressing distraction is not about removing enjoyment or productivity. It is about reclaiming authorship over attention. Reducing distraction does not require drastic change. It requires intentional pauses, moments where you choose to remain present rather than escape into activity. Those moments restore signal strength quickly. Alignment responds immediately to reclaimed attention. You are not being asked to eliminate distraction entirely. That would be unrealistic. You are being asked to recognize when distraction is functioning as avoidance rather than rest. Rest restores clarity. Avoidance postpones it. Learning to tell the difference is part of discernment. When attention returns, alignment strengthens. When alignment strengthens, distraction loses its grip naturally. There is no battle required, only awareness. This is how distraction weakens alignment and how simply noticing it restores coherence. What is being protected right now is not an outcome, a possession, or a promise. It is your perception. Perception determines how you interpret what happens, which choices you make, and how deeply events affect you. When perception is clear, even difficult situations are navigable. When perception is distorted, even favorable conditions feel threatening. Protection at this stage is aimed at preserving clarity before movement accelerates. This protection is subtle. It does not block experiences from occurring. It filters how much influence they are allowed to have. You may notice that certain comments no longer land the way they used to, or that situations which once unsettled you now pass through with less residue. This is not numbness. It is selectivity being restored. What matters reaches you. What does not moves on. Timing is also being protected. Premature movement can fracture alignment. When things happen too quickly, integration lags behind action. That gap creates instability. Protection holds space until readiness and opportunity meet at the same pace. This ensures that when movement occurs, it is sustainable rather than reactive. Your peace is being protected as well, not as comfort, but as signal integrity. Peace functions as feedback. It lets you know when you are aligned and when you are not. If peace were constantly disrupted by external noise, you would lose that reference point. Protection preserves the conditions under which peace can continue to inform your decisions. You may feel moments where something tries to pull you into urgency, requests, opinions, expectations. Notice how often those pulls lose momentum before fully engaging you. That is not coincidence. It is containment. You are being given space to choose rather than react. That space is what protection looks like in practice. Protection also extends to your energy. Not all drains are obvious. Some come from over-explaining, overthinking, or overcommitting. You may find yourself less willing to engage in conversations that go nowhere or projects that feel misaligned. This is not withdrawal, it is conservation. Energy preserved now will be needed later. There is protection around your discernment as well. You are less susceptible to persuasion that relies on emotion rather than truth. Appeals to fear, urgency, or comparison lose effectiveness. This does not make you rigid. It makes you harder to manipulate. Discernment thrives when perception is not constantly being pulled off center. What is also being protected is your capacity to integrate change. Growth is not only about movement, it is about absorption. Without protection, change arrives faster than it can be processed, leading to overwhelm. With protection, change arrives at a pace your system can hold. This is why things may feel quieter than expected. Quiet allows integration. You may notice that certain paths simply do not progress right now, even when effort is applied. This is not obstruction. It is redirection through pause. Protection sometimes says, "Not yet," to prevent you from investing energy where alignment is not present. This prevents entanglement that would require greater effort to undo later. Protection does not mean isolation. You are not being shielded from life. You are being buffered from distortion. You remain engaged, but less entangled. This balance allows you to participate fully without being consumed. Nothing about this protection is fragile. It does not depend on perfection. It adjusts as you do. When you stay attentive, it strengthens. When you drift, it holds without judgment. It is responsive, not rigid. What is being protected right now is the foundation upon which everything else will rest. Perception, timing, peace, energy, discernment. These are the structures that determine whether what comes next will add weight or create strain. Preserving them now is not delay, it is preparation. Later feels harmless because it sounds responsible. It suggests patience, thoughtfulness, and self-control. But often, later is not a time, it is a buffer, a psychological distance placed between awareness and engagement. It allows you to acknowledge something without responding to it. That is why it is so appealing. It gives the relief of recognition without the weight of participation. The illusion of later works by promising certainty. It tells you that when conditions are better, when you are more rested, more confident, more informed, less busy, you will engage fully. But those conditions are rarely met all at once. Life does not pause to create ideal circumstances. Alignment appears within real conditions, not perfect ones. Later postpones engagement until a moment that may never arrive in the same configuration. This does not mean waiting is wrong. Waiting can be intentional and aligned. The difference lies in awareness. Waiting with awareness keeps connection intact. Later often dissolves it. When you consciously wait, you remain present with what you know. When you defer with later, attention disengages and clarity fades. The illusion also creates emotional distance. By placing something in the future, you reduce its immediacy. What felt meaningful now feels abstract later. That abstraction weakens resonance. When resonance weakens, motivation follows. What once felt important becomes optional. This is how insight dissipates, not through rejection, but through postponement. You may recognize this pattern in other areas of life. Ideas you meant to revisit, conversations you plan to have, changes you intended to make soon. Some eventually returned with more urgency. Others faded entirely, not because they lacked value, but because timing passed without engagement. Later also protects identity. Engaging now might require adjustment of habits, priorities, or self-perception. Later allows you to keep your current structure intact while still believing change is possible. This belief is comforting, but it can quietly anchor you in place. It is important to understand that alignment does not pressure you to act immediately. It simply asks you to remain present. Presence does not require resolution. It requires honesty. When you say later, honestly, acknowledging that you are choosing to disengage, that honesty preserves agency. When later is used unconsciously, it obscures choice. The illusion becomes costly when later repeats. Each repetition reinforces distance. Awareness surfaces, fades, resurfaces in a weaker form, fades again. Over time, this creates a sense of dullness or stagnation, not because nothing is happening, but because connection is repeatedly deferred. You may notice that later often appears when something matters. Trivial things do not require postponement, they are easily dismissed. What you delay with later usually carries weight. That weight is what makes it uncomfortable to engage immediately. Recognizing this removes confusion. Discomfort does not signal danger, it signals relevance. This message does not ask you to abandon later entirely. It asks you to see it clearly, to recognize when later is rest and when it is avoidance, to notice when postponement preserves alignment and when it dissolves it. If you choose later consciously, you do so with awareness of its effect. You know that momentum will pause. You know clarity may soften, and you accept that outcome without resentment. That choice remains aligned because it is owned. The illusion dissolves the moment you replace later with clarity. Not now, and here is why. Or not now, and I am choosing to stay aware. Awareness transforms postponement into intention. What matters is not immediacy, but honesty. Alignment does not demand action on a schedule. It responds to presence. When presence is maintained, timing adjusts naturally. So when later appears, pause, not to judge it, but to understand it. Ask what it is protecting you from and what it may be postponing unnecessarily. In that understanding, choice returns. And when choice returns, alignment remains intact, whether you move now or consciously wait. Choice without pressure is the quiet center of everything unfolding now. It is the absence of coercion that gives your decision real weight. When no threat is attached, when no reward is dangled, when no consequence is exaggerated, what remains is authenticity. This is where alignment becomes genuine rather than reactive. Pressure forces movement, but it distorts direction. Under pressure, people choose what relieves discomfort fastest, not what aligns most deeply. That kind of movement creates temporary relief, followed by long-term misalignment. What is being offered here removes pressure deliberately so that your choice, whatever it is, reflects truth rather than urgency. You may notice how unfamiliar this feels. Many systems, social, emotional, even spiritual, train people to respond under pressure. Deadlines, expectations, fear of loss, fear of judgment. When those forces are removed, the nervous system does not immediately relax. It looks for the push it is used to. In that absence, uncertainty can surface. That uncertainty is not confusion, it is freedom adjusting itself. Choice without pressure requires self-trust. Without an external force telling you what to do, you must listen internally. That listening may feel quiet at first. You may wonder if you are missing something, if you should feel more urgency. But urgency is not a requirement for importance. Many of the most consequential decisions are made calmly. This is why nothing in this message demands compliance. Demands create obedience, not alignment. Alignment emerges when you choose presence because it resonates, not because you are afraid of consequence. When you stay because something feels true rather than threatening, your engagement carries integrity. You are being allowed to choose at your own pace. That pace matters. Too fast, and integration lags behind. Too slow, and momentum dissipates. Without pressure, you naturally find the rhythm that suits your capacity. That rhythm is unique to you. It cannot be imposed from outside. Choice without pressure also removes the need for justification. When you decide freely, you do not need to defend your decision to yourself or others. Defensiveness arises when choice is compromised. Freedom dissolves it. You may find yourself explaining less, proving less, convincing less. That is a sign of internal alignment. You may also notice that when pressure is absent, responsibility becomes clearer. Without external force, you see your choice for what it is. You cannot blame urgency or fear. This is not meant to burden you. It is meant to empower you. Ownership without pressure is sustainable. Ownership under pressure collapses. There is also compassion in this space. You are allowed to choose differently at different times. You are allowed to engage now and disengage later. You are allowed to pause and return. Pressure would turn those movements into failure. Freedom turns them into navigation. This is why the message emphasizes invitation rather than warning. Warnings rely on fear. Invitations rely on recognition. Recognition lasts longer. When you recognize something as meaningful, you return to it naturally. No one has to chase you. Choice without pressure also protects discernment. When no outcome is forced, you can feel into resonance rather than calculating risk. Resonance is quieter than logic, but more reliable over time. It is the sense of rightness that remains after emotion fades. Whatever you choose in this moment will not define you permanently. It will simply determine what unfolds next. And what unfolds next will always offer another opportunity for awareness, another chance for alignment, another moment of choice. That is the nature of this guidance. It does not trap you, it does not corner you, it does not bind you to a single moment. It honors continuity rather than ultimatum. So choose freely. Stay present if it resonates. Step away if you need space. Either way, let the choice be yours, unpressured, unthreatened, and honest. From that place, whatever path you take will meet you with integrity.